Bene, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone. Immigration and the need of others, Italy, Europe and the world. This is the topic of today's meeting. Immigration and the need for others. Others lying in the need. This is the meaning of this title. But there's another implication, a suggestion in this title, that we need others. Each of us needs another person. Other people are something good. When we talk about immigration, migration, immigrants, what springs to mind is a cascade of issues, topics, words, concepts, meanings, and questions, because this word, immigrant, implies a meeting, it implies bumping into someone who is coming to me, and this embodies many questions to be able to live this relationship with another person arriving. This person I am faced with. Who is this other person? Who am I? What do we have in common and what do we not have in common? Helping, welcoming, rejecting, integrating, hosting, all these implications instinctively spring to mind and to the heart when we talk about this topic and when we use the word immigrant. In the meantime, this is a world phenomenon, of course. In 2012, this is just one figure. The flood of figures on this topic are innumerable and depend on the different parameters that are adopted. But to give you some idea, in 2012 it was calculated that 230,000 people, 2% of the world's population, left their own countries to live elsewhere, with an increase of 60 million with respect to the year before. When we say people who leave their own countries to go and live elsewhere, this implies many categories of people with very different problems and very different needs. We have, in recent years and in recent months, have a portion of this enormous number, and they are people who are fleeing from situations of violence and persecution, underdevelopment, people who are looking for a different present and imagine a different future. We will talk about all these topics with our guests today. We have a panel of experts here. I'd just like to introduce them, and then I will ask them, each of them, to take the floor. We have Admiral Giuseppe de Giorgi, Chief of Staff of the Navy. We have the State Undersecretary to the Prime Minister's Office and in charge of policies and European affairs, Sandro Gozi. We have two excellencies on my left, Msgr Michele Pennisi, Archbishop of Monreale, Sicily, and on my right, Msgr Silvano Maria Tomasi from the Permanent Observatory of the Holy See for the United Nations in Geneva. And lastly, we have Carla Trommino, a lawyer and president of the AccoglieRete Association for the Protection of Unaccompanied Foreign Minors. So we have different viewpoints and different approaches to this topic. What we have in mind is the phenomenon of those who flee, who escape, looking for a different present and a different future. Refugees and categories of refugees, which also include the so-called displaced persons, internally displaced persons. I don't know whether the United Nations technically consider these people migrants or not, but we think of the recent exodus in Iraq of populations who are fleeing from situations of conflict. So just to give you some idea, in 2013, this portion of immigrants was calculated to be around 51 million. If we were in just a country itself, it would be the 21st country in itself. A recent figure, what does this mean? Let's think about Syria. Many of the refugees from Syria have sought refuge in Lebanon, and in recent years, the population of Lebanon has grown by 178 immigrants for every 100 inhabitants. And this is the amazing size of immigration and the refugee problem. This affects the whole world and not just the Mediterranean. The United States has its own problem. Recently, we've been talking about the question of minors, unaccompanied foreign minors, entering the United States in various ways from Central America and Latin America. 44,000 have been counted in 4 months from last June. So you can see that this topic affects every country in the world, affects every society and every culture. The United States Department of State circulated a report claiming that never, as in last year, have there been so many refugees and immigrants for religious reasons. Coming to Italy, we have had for decades the images of boats full of immigrants and the exodus from Albania, which some of you will recall. And in all these years, we have had a fixed image. And recently, just yesterday and again today, hundreds of thousands of immigrants from the shores of the Mediterranean, from Africa, and here all the problems that have arisen in the wake of immigration, all the questions we referred to before, the rescue attempts, the dead, the rescue, the reception centers, the disorder, the political issues, the administrative questions, the island of Lampedusa and Europe. Much has been said in recent days. So I would like all of us to follow this topic at today's meeting, to follow what these people are doing as I am asking our experts to take the floor so that we can understand something more about what is happening along the way. So I'd now like to ask Admiral Giuseppe de Giorgi, Chief of Staff of the Navy, to take the floor. He obviously is responsible for what we call our sea, Mare Nostrum, and is the first point of call for the hundreds of thousands of immigrants arriving on our shores. Good morning, everyone. I have a few slides to show you, and they should appear on the screen in a minute. Okay, here they are. You don't have to kill time. I have the slides here on the screen. These are images that I have brought along to bear witness to what is happening at the moment and from when Operation Mare Nostrum was launched. The main global issues that have led to this mass biblical exodus of immigrants are all factors that we have studied at length. Those that have studied war and immigration, and now we have an explosion of a whole series of events. We have international conflict. At the moment, in the Mediterranean in particular, we have a whole series of problems concurrently occurring in the Mediterranean and each fueling each other. We have war in Syria and in Iraq. We have the influence of the Persian Gulf, the economic factors underlying these conflicts often. We have an increase in religious conflict, which has exploded not only between Christians and Muslims, but also violently on an interreligious basis between Muslims, between Shiite Muslims and Sunnite Muslims. Another phenomenon which we did not imagine happening was the weakening of the efficacy of the United Nations, for example. And then we have the effect of the media effect, the media that can orientate certain phenomena and the attention of the world stage and shift certain situations to the background and others exploding into very serious conflicts. So these are events on a planetary scale. We have demographic growth. We have the explosion of the Ebola epidemic in Africa and other devastating problems. Where does Italy come into all this on a world scale? In blue, I've highlighted on this globe, we have a scenario of reference for Italy. Here we have a concentration of national strategic interests, not only in terms of energy, but also for strategic purposes. For example, access to Gibraltar and the Suez Canal, Angola and Mozambique for the national economy. So in this part of the world, we have a concentration of biblical problems. So what was a long-lasting problem in recent years has now in recent months escalated exponentially. As you can see in the slide, problems span Eritrea, where we have a very large percentage of immigrants rescued at sea, stretching to Mali, this whole stretch of sub-Saharan Africa, an immense area giving rise to biblical exodus of immigrants. This is flanked by problems in Syria and in Iraq. This slide shows more detail of the phenomenon underway before the Operation Mare Nostrum. Here we can see routes of emigration and how the various routes of how immigrants reach Italy, previously directly from North Africa, often being injured in the sea, and then from other areas moving on to other parts of Europe. Then we can see an exchange from the first major ship where people traffickers would unload a large ship onto smaller ships organized on a military scale. About 350 miles from the Italian coast, the small ship would be abandoned full of immigrants where 10 or 15 people traffickers would leave on the seaworthy ship. The Italian Navy has been monitoring the canal of the Sea of Sicily, monitoring fishing boats which were attacked in that area, either in international waters or in Italian seas, often by Tunisian boats. Then with the increase in immigration via sea, we have increased the number of ships available, and this was flanked by the activity carried out by the European Union agency Frontex, which patrols the area. On the night between the 3rd and the 4th of October, 366 people died only 2 miles off the coast of Sicily. This tragedy triggered the Mare Nostrum operation. Italian population, who already aware of what was going on, was brought to face the seriousness of the situation, and it became essential to take action. And in the space of 24 hours, the humanitarian safety mission reinforced the sea surveillance operations to improve safety in the sea, personal safety and security in terms of contrasting illegal immigration. So these two aspects of the Mare Nostrum mission aim at capturing people traffickers and also to combat the use of human trafficking and in using intelligence and safeguarding human lives on the sea with a special device which includes actions by the captains of Sicilian ports. We use the Navy for large operations in sea. It is an armed force which can take action all over the sea with an operative command center with all the necessary tools and instrumentation to link up with from sea to the other agencies working in and around the sea. We have in the sea a movable operative center linked by satellite to a network of national communications, and these constitute an important set of centers to control the sea without support from land. The size of our ships allows us to train personnel and to monitor the seas because our primary objective is to have amphibian means to be able to land sailors on eventual enemy beaches, and these are the best forms of equipment for helping people in an emergency situation to rescue them in the sea. These amphibian means also have operating theatres to tackle the wounded and to treat them. Policing the sea is another pillar of the Navy, an international possibility of acting in open sea, where in international waters we are also able, in a massive operation, every day we have at least 5 ships in the sea with land-based aircraft. So we cooperate not only with ports in Italy, but also with the Air Force, with the police, with the Carabinieri, and with voluntary organizations. The operation was designed to combat, on the one hand, human trafficking of people from Egypt, and also to be able to rescue immigrants in the area which is most hazardous. The area of our operation is 3 times the size of Sicily, as you can see from this map. This is one of the key aspects which in the future we will be focusing on in our spending review. This is the coordination of the government and Italian state in the high seas. This has been designed to concentrate in one command center all the state organizations, including civil protection, to be able to manage operations on the sea. Unfortunately, the weak spot of this situation, only one country, the Slovenia, has contributed a ship to help patrol the seas. International cooperation is weak. We have cooperation with Frontex, the EU agency, with motorboats, and we have also tried to establish relations with Libya. We have a training program for the Libyan Navy. Our current program includes, as I said, rescue operations and also to combat human trafficking and illegality. When the shipwrecked migrants are taken aboard, they have medical screening. They are assisted by cultural mediators provided by the Home Office. Then we have voluntary organizations. They are given medical treatment, and in the most severe cases, they are transported by helicopter to treat the wounded. If the migrants are in good health conditions, procedures for identification and immigration procedures continue, and the migrants are taken to a place of safety. This procedure that these ships allow, because they are very large ships, already overcomes some of the trauma of on-board reception before they reach the immigrants reach the reception centres in Italy. So this initial reception means that we can identify and establish better health conditions for rescued migrants. One of the positive effects of Mare Nostrum was creation of synergies with the other ministries, first and foremost the Ministry of Health, the Italian Red Cross, the Order of Malta Volunteers, and other foundations and voluntary organizations. We have a mixed group of very different origin, but the results have been exceptionally positive. In addition to Navy doctors, we have the Military Red Cross, we have voluntary nurses from the Rava Foundation and from the Italian Red Cross, and other volunteers. We have signed a protocol with the Ministry of Health, so on some ships we also have on board special stretchers for extreme cases, for example, Ebola infection, with depressurized chambers to be able to examine suspected infectious disease cases. In terms of policing the high seas, this is done initially by acquiring evidence. The first photo there is an air view of a patrol ship some miles off the Italian coast, and the second is a periscope photo from a submarine that followed for 72 hours two trafficking fishing ships, fairly large ships, where we were able to rescue immigrants on board, and we were also able to gain evidence with the authority of a magistrate. We were then able to arrest the people traffickers, and in case of suspicion of the crimes I have spoken of, there we were able to stop the boats escaping, and the San Marco Fusiliers came on board, and the 16 human traffickers were then arrested. Here we can see the photographs of the boat going closer to the immigrant illegal boat. As you know, they beat the migrants on board, packed in like sardines, and they charged them different prices depending on positioning on the boat, being positioned underneath in the bowels of the boat, where it's cheaper, where there is a risk of suffocation. As you can see, the different types of boats start off with a very simple tourist inflatable boat, usually made in China, with very little resistance, and they upturn very easily. Then we have a growing activity with fishing boats that recover boats where we have saved the immigrants, and they are reused for human trafficking purposes. Underneath the larger boats are the main boats which then unload the immigrants onto smaller boats. Most immigrants come from Eritrea and Syria, then Mali, Gambia, Somalia, Pakistan, Senegal, Tunisia, and Iraq. The results of our operation show figures. 113,000 immigrants have been assisted. 187 was the record of unloading passengers from one single boat. We have 4 mother boats that were captured, 230 traffickers arrested and handed over to the legal authorities, and we have 99% of immigrants intercepted before the point of arrival on the Italian coast. This is extremely important because there we reduce the possibility of infection of the local community on the coast and the possibility of restraining any potential terrorists, and we also implement reception protocols. The perception at the outset was that Mare Nostrum has increased the immigration flows, but this graph, the left line is the ratio of the arrival of clandestine immigrants before the Mare Nostrum protocol. So this changeover in the incidence of illegal immigrants is compared to the green line underneath, which was the rate last year. So here, Mare Nostrum has not affected the percentages, but rather the collapse of the countries of origin from where these immigrants leave. And the graph then peaks with the summer season. Here, this photo gives you some idea of how the operations are conducted. This is a disembarking means. This is the best vessel for large numbers of migrants. Here, the immigrants can safely be taken on board, and from smaller vessels, this is another vessel where small boats can take on people on a sort of floating sled that can support the vessel, which is extremely important for the children. And children, unfortunately, are very frequent. This is a typical image showing a 1,500-ton ship completely full, covered with gold and aluminium to stop the cover used to stop the immigrants suffering from heat dispersion. Here we have an amphibious vessel. Again, the irresistible attraction of children. So here we have the sailor who is feeding a child, because the population we are dealing with involves you and on an emotional scale. There are 2 aspects. One is gratification, but also extreme sorrow. It's not a question of human effort, it's emotional stress when families are rescued, families who have lost a child, a husband, or a wife. So at the end of the day, these sailors are emotionally affected by the people they encounter. These are the faces we often encounter. These are our customers. These are our clients. They are people who have a great deal of dignity, who come from far-off lands. And this is the gratifying aspect. Here we have one of our fusiliers who are acting as a babysitter. Here we have a fortunate family all together. So to conclude promptly, very quickly, Mare Nostrum has allowed us to reduce the illegality of the open seas. It's reduced the number of immigrants arriving on the shores of Italy and allowed a better reception of immigrants. The geopolitical situation does not offer much optimism for the future. We cannot reject those who request asylum. So not only could Mare Nostrum not be implemented, but we need to maintain some kind of operation that the government will decide, some operation that can carry forward the same results that have been obtained. Obviously, the international community must, for example, support the Libyan government towards a more stable situation, organize regular flow of asylum seekers to Europe, and to intervene in the countries of origin of these immigrants. Obviously, this goes beyond the scope of the work of the Navy, but is part of training for safety and future actions to avoid illegal immigrants arriving on the coast of Italy directly, and to offer medical treatment and to allow the legitimate use of the sea. This is one of the most wonderful aspects, this perception of Italy seen from immigrants. This is a drawing by a little Iraqi girl. We have our colored boat with green, white, and red Italian sailors and the colored aeroplanes, a positive image of Italy from the standpoint of immigrants. So Italy hasn't been left behind and has not turned away. Thank you very much.
Veramente grazie.
Well, thank you very much. Well, excuse me for interrupting you, but thank you very much for your words. That really made us understand many things that we didn't know. And thank you very much for all the things that you do, and congratulate these nearly 1,000 people at sea every day. That is the result of special attitude. Now, Monsignor Pennisi, Archbishop of Monreale, well, after rescuing these people, well, so many of them arrived at the shores of Sicily. What is the impact of these people? What's the experience of the Sicilian church? Well, first of all, the issue of the others. Well, others are those who have to be welcomed and received. We also need these other people to learn how to receive them. Sicily and Italy are the gate of Europe on the Mediterranean Sea, so refugees are something of which Europe and the whole world have to care for. So we have to consider the countries of origin, the countries of transit, and the final destination. Many people do not want to remain in Sicily. They want to reach other European countries. There are many Italians who migrated abroad who experienced the same things that these refugees coming from Africa are experiencing. So faced with the presence of migrants, we could adopt three attitudes. Well, the first, unfortunately, is that of rejection in the majority of cases. This is not due to racism or xenophobia. People say, why has the government just spent so much money to receive these people when these funds could be used to support the poorest layers of society and the unemployed? The second is apparently favorable to receiving these people, but for the same reasons, i.e. those who can be cynical and make a business out of that. Real estate dealers, service providers, hotels hosting migrants indeed can draw their profits without caring for the quality of life of the migrants. A third attitude is that of those who offer solidarity and welcome the migrants. They are considered as brothers or sisters in difficulties to be loved, served, and to be welcomed. Just think of the rescue offered to the migrants by fishermen, the army, doctors, volunteers, characters, and parishes and associations in Lampedusa, showing what an open-minded population can do. Showing the world the value and the efficacy of simple and significant gestures, being close to them, rescuing, crying up wrath, patience. The tragedy of the death in the Mediterranean Sea opened up the eyes on the massacre of the innocents, which has changed the Mediterranean Sea into a big cemetery and has pierced the thick veil of indifference which had accompanied the landing of migrants for years. During the visit at Lemina that bishops paid to the Pope, well, we referred of the drama, the tragedy of migrants, and the Pope was very much impressed, and he decided to give a strong signal when visiting Lampedusa in July the 8th. That was a way of coming closer to migrants, to wake up our consciences so that to avoid that what happened is repeated. So we have still in mind the questions launched by the Pope. Adam, where are you? Cain, where is your brother? This is what the Pope said. It's a question that is addressed to me, to you, to every one of us. These brothers and sisters were trying to escape and flee from difficult situations to find some serenity and peace. They were looking for a better place for them and their families, but they found only death. How many times those who look for that are not understood, are not received, are not welcomed, they don't receive solidarity. Again, a question posed by the Pope: who is the person to be blamed for the bloodshedding of these brothers and sisters? He said, we cannot say no one. The 3rd of October 2013, I was in the Clementina room on the occasion of the hearing by Pope Francis on the Pontifical Council of Justice, when he said that he felt ashamed. It's not only an accusation against those who are directly responsible, but also a way of taking up responsibility. And the Pope invites to take up our own responsibilities. What are we supposed to do? Well, first of all, we should help these people to live in a dignified way in their countries of origin. The tragedy of migrations in the Mediterranean Sea and in the world comes from the breaching of a primary right, i.e. of living in their own homeland. The origin of such violation have wars, conflicts, unfair distribution of economic resources. These have to be corrected by promoting a complete and balanced economic development, going beyond social inequalities while respecting human beings. So closing the doors to migrants without getting committed to remove the causes is a great injustice, but a tremendous injustice. So the poverty and wars provoking forced migrations require urgent solutions. To those who landed on our shores, well, our task as Christians is to welcome them, to care for them by going beyond the barrier of indifference, like the Good Samaritan, without forgetting the words of Jesus. He said, I was an alien and you welcomed me. So we need a cultural revolution. We need to open up and welcome and offer solidarity. This new culture can only be supported through European, national, local and world policies which have not yet developed correct policies for welcoming and integrate these people in order to offer a virtuous response to that tragedy. We should make work for a new culture where migrants are not considered as production means. They should be considered as men and women who are dignified as sons and daughters of God. I think that the only way to welcome these people, and this is what we are doing in our dioceses, is to try and integrate them at community level through small structures which can really meet the needs of everyone. In the centres where they are welcomed all together, and there are thousands of them, it is much more difficult to meet individual needs. The present policy by the government, particularly in the past few years, where the migrants are, divided into big centres, is something which goes to the detriment to the system of protection for refugees and asylum seekers. We would need to guarantee a maximum number of migrants per city in order to offer things like Italian language courses, scholarships, and other tools to get integrated. It is up to political and military authorities to fight against the merchants of death, the human being traffickers, while safeguarding operations like Mare Nostrum. Anyway, the weight of immigration should not only be borne by Sicily and Italy. Europe should take that problem on board, which will last for a long time in the future. So we should go beyond the idea of Europe, which is closed and selfish. Now we need to implement an open European community, which is brave and working to offer complete development to build peace and solidarity among people. It's high time for the European Union to adopt a common policy in the management of migrant flows in order to harmonize national legislations to go beyond emergencies and see to that member states are united to cooperate and develop the countries of origin. We need to have a comprehensive approach on migration in order to implement international protections. We should amend the Convention of Dublin. These are not the Ten Commandments. We might, for example, implement a mutual recognition of the status as a refugee in all the countries members of the Schengen area, as proposed by the Italian government. We realize that many people reaching Sicily want to go to Germany or France in order to get united with their relatives. We should need to increase the number of committees in charge of that. Sometimes it takes about 12, 18 months to be recognized as a refugee. It's high time to break down the wall and the barriers of indifference and cynicism. There are many men, women and children who have died and are still in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. They come here to be welcomed and they should shake our consciences. They are calling for justice and solidarity. And I hope that our silence had not make their sacrifice useless. Thank you very much.
Grazie Eccellenza perché ci ha dato il senso.
Thank you very much for offering a different interpretation and for talking about your experience in welcoming the migrants. Now the floor to Carla Trommino, who is a lawyer from Sicily, from Syracuse, who set up the AccoglieRete Association for the protection of foreign minors, non-accompanied foreign minors. And this association has cared for more than 700 minors, and they gathered a very interesting experience. Because they really concentrate on the relationship with very needy human beings, i.e. the minors. And these people indeed should be offered a great future. So thank you very much. Please tell us about the experience you're doing in Sicily.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our work on the outskirts, because what I'm going to talk about is work on the outskirts, on the periphery. It's a setting with a dual concept. Sicily, Syracuse, and Augusta and its ports are on the outskirts, the periphery of Europe, and we welcome and work alongside young people that come from what are deemed the outskirts of the world, where there is war and hunger. The phenomenon of unaccompanied foreign minors has changed drastically in recent years, as the Admiral said. From 2003, immigration and immigration routes have changed alongside the immigration of unaccompanied minors. From 2007, there has been a constant increase in the immigration of minors, so we can really not talk about an emergency. Nonetheless, the number of unaccompanied minors has increased radically since last year, and from the start of Mare Nostrum, the young people we are dealing with are now number 4,000. We deal with between 80 and 90%, and this demands a response and a different approach, because the people we are dealing with are dually vulnerable. They are vulnerable in themselves because they are minors, because of the fact of being minors, because they are no longer surrounded by their geographic and cultural and family setting, and the fact that they are minors with all the specific needs linked to minors. So clearly there is a need for strong, specific intervention. In 2013, what did these young people come across when there was an increase in immigration flows? Reception in Italy for unaccompanied minors until October 2013 was undertaken by law. I'm a lawyer, so by law, as I said, minors were sent directly into communities that could welcome minors with no distinction. This is no longer possible, one, because of the increase in numbers, and also because of the chronic lack of payments to communities which receive money from the government after a year or more, so they no longer have the possibility of welcoming these minors. So before, minors were sent to centers for adults, and then when we decided to intervene with respect to unaccompanied minors, we found 15 unaccompanied minor Egyptians who had landed without the possibility of changing their clothes, and some other minors from Somalia who were sleeping on mattresses without any sheets and could not protect themselves from infection of scabies. And as you know, the symbolic value of taking action is a shoe. We have shoes that are evoked in the stories of these young people. And we had minors in our centers, but they had no shoes on their feet. So we needed to take action. And also from the standpoint of what was mentioned yesterday, and that is there is a limit to how far you can stand and watch. And this doesn't mean that we will stop asking the institutions for what they are required to do and to guarantee institutionally, but we directly need to take responsibility for these minors These unaccompanied foreign minors, I mean minors who come to Italy, they're aged between 15 and 17 years old, or they may be even as young as 10. They are alone without adult figures of reference. So for us, it was inevitable to take individual action directly, and 130 guardians, 18 families, and several parishes have opened their doors of their homes and their communities and their hearts to directly tackle the problem of acting as guardians responsible for these minors. This meant that whereas before minors were identified numbers who, when I tried to start doing this work, it was impossible for me to take action referring to minors because they were only known by numbers. There were no names, no surnames. It was difficult to understand who we were talking about. They were numbers on paper being shifted from one place to another, waiting for them to disappear. And out of 540 minors, we had at the outset 400 disappeared without trace. And here the outcome was simply run away, arbitrarily run away, and this means that they end up in Milan, in microcrime, drug trafficking, drug dealing, or in the area around Naples, ending up in prostitution. For Nigerian young girls, it meant remaining in human trafficking for prostitution purposes, being sent to Rome or sent to deal drugs elsewhere. So our organization decided to focus on the figure of a guardian, a direct contact with the minor, and our project sets out a guardian for each unaccompanied minor. The figure of the guardian is a figure guaranteeing protection or tutorship of the minor as an institutional guardian, because before we had mass guardians for 200 or 300 minors where it was impossible to deal with them directly, and therefore they ended up again in a situation of hazard, prostitution and drug dealing. Now we've managed to place 700 unaccompanied minors with a figure, a guardian of reference, an individual who takes care of them on a one-to-one basis. So now they have a name and a surname. They are not simply a number. We have an immigration project. The first thing we try and do is to listen to them and to listen to their desires, to find out why they had to leave their country of origin, to try and understand the violence that they'd suffered in their countries of origin and in the countries of transit en route, because Libya is a dramatically violent country, and young girls and young boys experience physical violence. At least 50% of them are placed in prison, are imprisoned and undergo electroshock torture. They are traumatized and they require immediate action and treatment. So this is what we've been trying to do. Now, just to talk about me, I have been an immigration lawyer since 2007. The difference from when I started to tackle immigration until last year, and from last year until today, from when immigrants came into my home, because I was the first person to open my doors. I had a spare room, and I have a young boy who lives in my home, and this changed my perspective completely. So this is just another challenge. The challenge immediately is to ensure that each minor has an individual treatment. And now only 96 miners have run away, whereas before this project, the majority of miners managed to run off and disappear. So now we have people in our homes, and we are taking charge of their ideals and their projects for emigration. And this doesn't mean exclusively working in their interests, but it also means working in our interests, because immigration is not a short-term phenomenon. This is something that is ongoing, so obviously we will have to devise a response, a rational and intelligent and organic answer to something which is not an emergency, and we cannot leave these unaccompanied minors. As the Archbishop said before, we cannot leave them in centres with 200 minors where they experience violence because there is no vigilance, there's no supervision, and this is what happens when large numbers of people are massed together. So we're trying to test a different model of reception. Like last year when I thought about insisting on welcome into families and into communities, I wasn't sure myself, but I saw too much diffidence against this experience, because fostering is a difficult process in Italy in general. Well, this model now, I can say it has taken off. We have 18 families who have opened their homes to unaccompanied minors. We have 30 unaccompanied foreign minors who are now placed in what we call a decentralized welcome system. We have 200 families and parishes that have taken charge of these minors on a community basis. And we also have alternative settings. We have sports associations that have taken on some of these minors who have skills and talent. This is another future prospect for these young people who present an enormous challenge. Because, as I said, when I changed from being a lawyer to being a guardian, opening her home to welcoming an unaccompanied minor, my outlook changed. Firstly, I realized that I was talking to the other guardians who are here today, who have come along because they belong to your movement, Comunione Liberazione. First of all, I thought about the documents. They came to me to have identity documents, and that seemed to be the only thing that they needed to then start the whole procedure of immigrating into Italy. But it's not exactly limited to that. Documents are crucial. They're required for enrollment in the health service, for enrolling in school, for a whole series of issues. Identity documents are essential, but that is a precondition, because when you have someone in your home and you listen to their hopes and their project, and you find out they want to become doctors or lawyers, and that they don't have the possibility directly of doing that, so we see that there is yet another challenge. We need to accompany them along the road towards education and to work. And what I've now realized, and I didn't realize before, and that we are working on with psychiatrists and with other experts, there's a political issue here. The question of cultural diversity. There is a background vision sort of atavistic conviction. We think that we are right, we have the right model, and we have the right views to transmit to them. But they, at the same time, have an underlying anger, even if they're grateful for being rescued, for being welcomed into our homes, they have this strong anger, which is a conflictual question. And that is something I want to present to you, to try to overcome the risk of looking at the future with an organic vision and the risk of creating a ghettoization of immigrants, immigrants working in the fields, relegated to the periphery. What we need to concentrate on is diffuse and decentralized welcome. And this is also economically the most viable solution, because reception in a family, we're talking about 450 euro reimbursement a month, whereas in these dehumanizing reception centers, where violence in Italy is added to violence in their countries of origin and transit, it's much more expensive, because in communities it's 70 euro a head. And in these other centers it was 30 and now possibly 40 per head. So aiming at this solution, in Holland, at least 50% of immigrants, they have welcomed 12,000 unaccompanied minors to date. So this, I would like to present this as a solution to the institutions present here today. And this is imbued in the name, the future tense of To Welcome, AccoglieRete, the name of our association. And it's an invitation to individuals, to communities, and to associations to open our homes and our hearts to these unaccompanied foreign minors who are the children of all of us. Thank you very much.
Grazie per il racconto.
Thank you very much for telling about this very nice experience. As Father Pizzaballa said yesterday, it's small things that give us a hope to go beyond tragedies. It's the experience of small children which can give us hopes for the future. 700 children is just a part of a crowd, but it's there that new things are done and a new approach is developed in the field of reception. Sandro Gozi is an old friend of the meeting. He was born in Sogliano, Rubicone, not far away from here. Where Monsignor Pietro Sandri was born, who passed away not long ago. And Monsignor Tomasi will attend the presentation of a biographical book on the relations in the world. So Sandro Gozi is the Under-Secretary in charge of European Union affairs. Usually we address politicians and the institutions not only because they can offer solutions, but indeed nobody has the magic wand to solve all these problems. But we indeed expect answers. We expect a vision from the institutions. Politics without the experience of the reception or welcoming of refugees, well, indeed, it's nothing, because politics is nourished with these experiences. So there is a very lively debate on the issue. Apparently, Europe has forgotten that there were many migrant flows within Europe. Now we are receiving migrants from outside Europe. So how is Europe experiencing that? Are we alone? What about the funds to support the Mare Nostrum operation? So can you talk about that? Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me again. I'm very glad to be here. Pietro Sandi was a very good friend for me, and a person who accompanied me, celebrated my wedding, baptized my 2 children. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to say a few words on him today. Well, referring to what Admiral Giorgi, Msgr Pennisi, and Mrs. Trommino said, we should not turn away from this tragedy. I would like to refer to your final sentence. I was reminded of a beautiful poem by Eugenio Montale, Forse un mattino andando, a poem that he included in the collection Cuttlefish Bones, Ossi di Seppia. Was referring to the Second World War, the concentration camps, Auschwitz, and the Shoah. I was reminded of that poem while listening to Admiral and Msgr Pennisi. It will be too late is the final sentence, and will go away in silence among men who do not turn their faces away with my secret. This is the final part of the poem. Mrs. Trommino spoke about the reasons why we should consider it unacceptable what's going on in the Mediterranean Sea. We cannot accept that the Mediterranean Sea, which has been the cradle of civilization, is treated like this. We have 3 mounts, Golgotha, the Acropolis, and the Campidoglio are the 3 hills where the culture of Europe was developed, and they are all located in the Mediterranean basin. Now this is becoming the cemetery and the place of indifference. This is the main reason pushing us to intervene. There are moral reasons and political reasons. Mrs. Trommino said that the children had no shoes. That reminded me about something which can happen in Budapest. If you go to Budapest, you see a line of bronze shoes on the banks of the Danube. Some of them are very tiny, very little. And they are there to what the Nazis asked the population to leave in January in 1945, because before burning them, shooting them, and throwing the corpses in the Danube. That is the day of the Red Danube. Because these are the sources of Europe. Europe was born there, united, saying stop to indifference, stop with violence. This is a sign telling Europeans that we should not turn our faces away. We have to stop and do something where there is suffering, desperation, and need for solidarity. Solidarity is mentioned 21 times in the European treaties, but I'm sure that European citizens today would not say solidarity if they were asked if I say Europe. What do you think of? but the treaties mention solidarity 21 times in the framework of immigration policies, asylum policies, not accompanied alien minors, and foreign policy as well. So if Europe is to demonstrate that they can do something, and they must do, because this is Europe, this is the Europe which was born on the ashes of concentration camps, Europe which is intended to offer justice to the owners of the shoes which are lined up on the banks of the river Danube in Budapest. So we have to take up our responsibilities in the field of migration of refugees or management of borders and foreign policies. Indeed, the two things, or these things, go hand in hand. As the Admiral said at the beginning, well, he referred to the fact that the number of conflicts, of international conflicts, is increasing. In Arab and Middle East countries, well, we as Europeans have a double responsibility. On the one hand, we have to help those countries to get freed from unacceptable regimes. We also have to help them in order not to fall in the hands of even worse dictatorships and regimes. The crisis is in Syria is getting worse over the weeks. There is the city of Aleppo, which used to be the example of the good living together of many different ethnic groups, and which is now in the hands of terrorist groups. So we have a moral responsibility. We must protect these people and stop massacres. The visit by our Prime Minister in Baghdad was intended to that end. We are the generation of people who experienced the massacres and the slaughters of Srebrenica. Now we have the privilege to be members of the government, and we are asked to guide this country and contribute to guide Europe. So we cannot accept that new cases like Srebrenica happen in the Middle East, because that would be denying the spirit of Europe. That's why we have decided to intervene in Iraq. We should learn from the mistakes of the past. We are paying the consequences of those mistakes. That's why we see many migrants coming to our shores. In the past, we financed the enemy of our enemies without trying to understand who the real enemy is and what are they working for. There were many contradictions for that, such as Khomeini, Saddam Hussein, Taliban in Afghanistan. So if we decide to change route, that would mean indeed intervening in the Middle East, but much more carefully, by carefully selecting the people to be supported without denying our values, and making choices not only based on the ability to avoid the creation of armed groups. That is what we are doing when supporting the Kurds in Iraq. It is not by chance that the slides we saw showed that the longest routes of migration were the red ones, and they were taking origin in Iraq. So if we want to, we heard a lot of interesting things today about the landing of migrants. Europe has to decide that we said that when the present government was elected. Europe should decide what to do in the future. Well, it's unacceptable that any time a new problem emerges which has an impact on the European population, is that of leaving the problem in the hands of the countries which is in the front line, like Italy is. So we need to make major step forward at European level, and that should be done during the semester Italian presidency. What's missing to Europe is solidarity and a vision. The vision of the Gasperi, Altiero Spinelli, and others. They were not assessing what the price of uniting Germany was. They were not deciding based on money. They made decisions because they were looking at the future in the name of a special vision of politics and the European Union at large. So if we are told that Italy received 2 huge funds through the Frontex, well, be able to realize what is the limited vision of simple accountants in Europe. Europe cannot only be financial constraints. We should also move from the Europe of declarations to Europe of facts. At the end of June, at the beginning of our semester, a document was approved by the European Council. What are the conclusions there? Just one day before the Italian semester started, which was the effort of the Greek presidency, well, that lists all the things that we advocate. There is a key element missing. Msgr Pennisi said that the principle of the mutual recognition of decisions for asylum seekers. Just read the document. It mentions the common management of borders, the distinction between legal and illegal migrants, the relationship between EU, the United Nations, and so on. Let's move from words to deeds. We have to go beyond the barrier of hypocrisy. We are able to write brilliant and wonderful political documents, and we never turn words into facts. The Minister for Home Affairs, Mr. Alfano, and myself, know that as the decisions are there in writing, we need to have the support of Europe in the field of Mare Nostrum, which will, in the end, be replaced with the initiatives of all European governments. This is only part of the answer. Another important thing is to establish partnerships with the different countries of origin. And only Europe has the possibility to do that. That would not be possible for Italy, Germany, or other countries alone. We should have different countries joining forces to jointly manage the flows of migrants. And that should be done between European countries, transit countries, and countries of origin. At the end of November, there will be a conference in Rome on that. So we'll have to play our roles. And now drawing to the conclusions. We are very committed. Indeed, usually governments are very much criticized whenever they decide. Indeed, Italy has to improve the asylum system. We have to set up more committees or commissions. That is a priority for the Italian government. We need to do more, also in terms of foreign non-accompanied minors of age. Indeed, the financial management of these issues is a great effort. Still, we are working at a European level. The joining of families is a very important issue. It concerns many different cities, Syracuse, Amsterdam, many other Italian cities and European cities. So we have to do something. We have to play our role at national level. And we'll have the single text in the field of migration, which will be drafted by the government. Either we improve the asylum system here, or we would not be able to have the idea of mutual recognition recognized. The Dublin Convention is the outcome of a different historical period. It's not adequate to pick up the challenge of migration that we have today. So every country should be able to trust all the others if we really want to have the idea of mutual recognition passed. And our government would like to become a better, more reliable partner for all the other European partners. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandro Gozi, for the lively presentation of Italy's commitment on this topic. Now, Monsignor Tomasi has many causes that he supports and has many human issues. His vocation was born within a congregation whose main aim is the care of immigrants. So his vocation led Monsignor Tomasi to the permanent observatory of the Holy See for the United Nations in Geneva. And his job is to deal with the topic of immigration. And Monsignor Tomasi's vision is valuable to us because, not only because it is on a world scale, but because he lives the principles with which we need to tackle this problem, and the principles of the Church focusing on this problem and on individual attention to each single person. Thank you. We have heard how immigration is not only an issue for Italy, but it is for the whole world. 1 person out of 7 all over the world is an international immigrant, either moving from one country to another or internally. So the world population needs to be read on a global scale. The impact of immigration flows and the diaspora, the role of immigrants in the economy, extends worldwide and triggers a whole chain of encounters and clashes in which partners are not left indifferent. The encounter can be a risk or an opportunity, because immigrants are not merely labor or desperate cases of refugees, but they are people with a story, with a culture, with deep convictions which guide their behavior. And faced with this situation, we need to ask the question of what our approach is, how we can receive or welcome these people, and how our attitude will change our societies. So we need to shift from tolerance or being subjected to this phenomenon, or traveling together to build a common future. The first step in this journey is mutual knowledge. This is a complex task to overcome stereotypes on each part. Briefly, I would say that we need to avoid electoral manipulations. For example, during the last election in the European Parliament, in many countries, immigration was used to frighten the population to gather votes. This manipulation is no use whatsoever. Secondly, we need to exercise the fear of others. Others are not just a threat, full stop. Others are other people. We need to enter into a dialogue with, and we need to get to know. Above all, the others are already here. It is interesting to look at the current figures. A large proportion of the labour force in many countries is already composed of immigrants, between 10 and 15% in Western Europe, around 18% in Australia, Canada and the United States, between 50 and 90% in the member states in the Gulf, between 10 and 20% in the Russian Federation, Caucasus and Central Asia. There is a need for others in this situation. So we truly need to find how to get to know immigrants who contribute labour, intelligence, creativity, and open the way to dialogue and cooperation. The second step is to manage immigration. Immigrants are not just an economic function of our societies, but they are also a social function. This is an encounter of people and peoples that needs to be managed on this basis. And here we see that there are two models, two ways of managing immigration. I'll bring you the example of Dubai. There, 95% of the population resident in Dubai is immigrant and cannot acquire rights to request citizenship or permanent residence. The super rich who go to stay in luxury hotels in Dubai and the super poor who go there to work. The work offered to poor immigrants certainly helps them, but at the same time, the situation shows the global inequality that persists. Faced with the second model of democratic countries, we see that immigrants, despite criticism, reservations, prejudice, and conflict, immigrants are accepted as partners to build future society. And here we see, on the one hand, the international community, which has developed a corpus juris, a series of measures, treaties, conventions, and agreements to protect the rights of immigrant workers and their families. And on the other hand, we see that in practice, as was referred earlier, we see the rights limping along, rights that are not respected, and a temptation to manage immigration outside the scope of the United Nations, outside the framework of the international community, to have more freedom, to be able to manage the situation on the part of countries receiving immigrants. So we see this dichotomy within the international setting, which doesn't help us to move in the right direction. So I would say that an innovative means of management must be inclusive and must make room for the voice of all. The countries, the reception countries, and the countries of immigrants to plan a national policy or regional policy like the European policy, or even a global policy for managing immigration flows. We cannot simply have part of the people involved, those receiving immigrants, to dialogue, but all must take part. The third step then, the third logical step, is to broaden the framework of participation so as to nationally or internationally, build the future by not a slice of the population, but by everyone. And here there enters into play the question of others. The other person, the person who's different from me, who has roots in distant lands, often has a different skin color. The other also has a responsibility. He has the duty to agree to participate in building a shared future. We cannot isolate the immigrant to the outskirts of Lyon, Paris, Marseille, or Milan. Immigrant groups on the one hand and the rest of the population on the other. This is a question of opening the way to everyone to walk towards the future together. This becomes a true partnership where a joint task is undertaken. The contribution of different cultures will enrich, but will also need to adapt to the receiving community for the common good. If the ethnic community does not act as a springboard to help immigrants to become an integrated citizens, then it will become an isolating ghetto, giving rise to inevitable conflict. Here we could ask an important question. Why do young people of second or third generation immigrants born and raised in Europe, why have they enrolled as volunteers in the so-called caliphate of IC between Iran and Syria? What went wrong? I think this is an important, legitimate question to ask ourselves. For the modern state, the French Revolution proposed its banner of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Some achievements have been made in freedom for individual rights and political equality. The equality and the dignity and fundamental rights of people is recognized at least as an ideal, and attempts are made to implement this, even though fraternity remains problematic and the hard issue on which integration must be built. At the same time, the international community cannot shut its eyes before the emergency that we are all bearing witness to. So we have this path of mutual knowledge and participation in building a shared future, real participation, a partnership that does not exclude but integrates into society. But then we are left with the chapter we've listened to this morning, the dramatic emergency of immigration. How do we behave before this emergency, and how is it absorbed in society as a whole? I would say that the social doctrine of the Church, on the one hand, claims the primordial right of remaining in your own country for a dignified life and emigrating only by free will and not because you're forced to do so because of extreme poverty, hardship, or violence. On the other hand, the same doctrine requires us to tackle these emergencies, starting from the conception that all people belong to one human race and that the concept of fraternity must prevail and must be translated into concrete actions and policies of solidarity so that others will not be abandoned to themselves but will continue to contribute, even in difficult circumstances, to the common good. The road to overcome the fear of others The road we need in order to become ourselves is suggested, and here I conclude, by an old parable in the Talmud. Two brothers are forced by thirst and hunger to separate to survive. The older brother remained in his father's house, and the other embarked on migration to a far-off country promising food and work. After many years apart, the two brothers had the desire to meet each other again before dying. They embarked on a long journey, one from the father's house, the other from the country of refuge. The older brother, with a few coins and some food in his pocket, walked for many days, and one day on the horizon at dusk saw movement and thought that wild beasts had come to attack him. He grasped his walking stick to defend himself, but as he moved forward, he realized that they were not wild beasts, but a person, and he thought it was a bandit who'd come to rob him. He was reassured that not only he had his stick, but he also had a knife for his defense, as it got darker and darker. But moving closer to the man coming towards him, he realized that the stranger was his brother, and he embraced him. Thank you. A very warm thanks to our guests of today for a very intense meeting. We have had very many things that I think each one of us will want to keep in their hearts and think about again. It's very late, so I would simply like you to enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much.